And we have to understand this, that we've had a belief about what evolution was predicated on, and we always focus on the nature of genes. That we would see that genes were controlling the traits and characters, and as you go up the evolutionary scale, there's going to be more genes and more character and traits evolving from these genes. And it turns out this is totally false. The whole idea about genes has been a totally misunderstood belief system that we bought into, that genes control life. Genes control nothing. Genes are blueprints. That's exactly what they are. And why that's relevant is we've been focusing on the blueprints and giving them self-realization, that they make a decision, a gene turns on and a gene turns off. And it turns out this is totally false. And the problem with this belief system, because it permeates our structure of the world, is that people perceive themselves as victims of a world because their genes are controlling them and they can't control their genes according to that belief. I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time years ago. I was cloning stem cells about 46 years ago. There was just a handful of us in the entire world that even knew what the hell a stem cell was. I did this study, and it's just so brief and so profoundly important. I just want to say what it represented. I would isolate one stem cell, which is an embryonic cell. Stem cells are embryo cells. The moment before you're born, I could say, here's an embryo cell, and then a moment after you're born, I look at the same cell and say, now it's called a stem cell. So that's what it represents. And the reason we have stem cells, and all of you have them because you are here, is the fact that every day we lose, as Carl Sagan would say, hundreds of billions of cells are dying every day, and we have to replace them. So we are growing every day of our lives by necessity. If you stop growing, if you stop the stem cells, you'll die right off. That's what it's going to be about. So the point about it is we all have these stem cells, we have these embryonic cells. I had isolate one cell, put it in a petri dish by itself. It divides every 10 or 12 hours, so after a week I have about 50,000 cells in the petri dish, but they all came from the same parent. So I had 50,000 genetically identical cells in the petri dish. The experiment that I did is just mind-boggling because it was so simple and profound, is I would take cells out of the master dish and put it into another petri dish and change the environment, the culture environment. Cells live in the equivalent of a synthetic blood that we make in a laboratory called culture medium. And by changing some of the composition of that culture medium, I put these cells from the main dish into this dish, and the cells form muscle. And I go back to the very same dish of stem cells, put them into a second petri dish with another environment, and they form bone. And I go back to the very same dish and put cells into a third petri dish with a different environment, and they form fat cells. Well, you're left with a very important and very profound question. What controls the fate of the cells? The answer, first of all, they were all genetically identical, so you can't invoke the genes as controlling this. It was the environment. My work on trying to understand how the environmental signals lead to the control of genes, which is now a new science since 1990. I saw this in 1967 and wrote about it, but it took 1990 until science recognized a new branch of science called epigenetics. And it's the most profound revolution in the world for a very important reason. When I say genetic control, it literally means control by genes. That's the belief, genes cause this and genes cause that, which is false. Epigenetic sounds like the same thing, epigenetic control, but epi is the entire revolution that this planet will pivot upon. For the reason is this, the prefix epi means above. So when I say epigenetic control, then I'm literally saying control above the genes. Well, that becomes important because when we always look for control, we always go to the genes. Now we're saying, well, where's the control above the gene? It led me to an understanding of what's called the cell membrane, the skin of the cell. And the relevance is that the skin of the cell is an information processor. It reads the environment, and it sends signals into the cell and to the genes to control the biology of the genes to live in an environment that's always changing. So the membrane is the nervous system of the cell. Just to let you know, in the development of a human, the outer layer of the embryo is called ectoderm, it's a skin. The skin gives rise only to two things in humans, skin and nervous system. So like the cell, our nervous system comes from this outer layer. Well, the significance about that, it led me to an understanding of how the cell worked and all that stuff, but it also led me to understand this. Evolution is, the way we perceive it, is a scale of increasing awareness. And so we make a whole evolutionary list. We start with bacteria, and then there are amoebas, and then there's worms, and then you get the, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, blah, blah, blah. And we see this as one continuous process with imperceptible changes over billions of years. Well, that is a total misperception. The genes do not represent our evolution for a simple reason. The number of genes in a human, which is now, I think, 22,333, is essentially the same number of genes in one of the smallest organisms we work with in a genetics lab. A worm with 1,200 cells has the same number of genes. So basically, the number of genes did not give us the big difference, okay? So basically, we were looking at the wrong thing. It turns out it's this membrane of the cell where intelligence comes from. And the significance of that is the most primitive organisms on this planet are called bacteria. And they are the smallest little cells, and they have like a capsule. They look like little medicine capsules, a lot of them. And the problem with that is the membrane of a bacterium can only get so big because once it reaches the maximum inside this capsule, that's all you can have. So evolution started by creating the bacteria and then multiplying them and creating all different kinds of versions of bacteria, but they were all still limited by their inability to expand their membrane. So by definition, evolution stopped. It couldn't make a smarter bacterium. There was no way it could happen. But evolution saw another way, and the other way was called community. That bacteria started to live in community with each other and put a membrane around themselves. And so they had a closed world, and the bacteria exchanged jobs because there were different kinds of bacteria, and they all exchanged. They exchanged their DNA, and they lived in a community. So the community of bacteria, called a biofilm, is the precursor of the next level of evolution, which is called the amoeba. The amoeba is a community of bacteria living under a skin, okay? Well, then the next level of evolution is what? Make more and more amoebas with variations on a theme. An amoeba has thousands of times more surface area membrane than a bacterium does. So an amoeba is thousands of times more intelligent in its ability. Then comes the interesting part. So the next level, and this is first billion years was basically bacteria, and then the amoebas came in at the end, and then the next billion years or so, billion and a half years, was variations on all the amoebas, which are what? Communities of bacteria with a membrane around them. Well, what happened was this. The amoeba got to a size where it can't get any bigger. Simple reason. It's like a balloon. Once you put water in the balloon, a little bit of water, we can throw the balloon all around the room. But if you put too much water in a balloon, try to throw it, the membrane rips. Well, the membrane rips, the cell dies. What's the point? Even amoebas reached a maximum size where they couldn't create any more membrane and still be viable. Evolution stopped for the second time. And then what happened was the next level of evolution was amoebas got together and formed a community and put a skin around them. And so we, by definition, are a community of 50 trillion amoebas underneath our skin. And they make the society, because the amoebas are the living element. We, by definition, are a community. I'm a community. I'm not an individual. I got 50 trillion citizens living inside. And the relevance about this is very important. There's no new function in the human that's not already present in the amoeba. Amoebas have a respiratory, digestive, excretory, nervous system, neuroendocrine system, reproductive system. Amoebas have an immune system, okay? Relevance is this. A human is the highest level of that community of amoebas and reached its maximum ability for its brain. And all the surface area of the brain with all the folds and gyri and so forth, that's increasing the surface area, but it maximized. The human represents another endpoint. And then what happens at an endpoint is the individuals come together in a community and form the next higher organization. The evolution that we are facing right now is the evolution of the next higher level of organization, where every human is a cell in the body of a superorganism that's forming, and that superorganism is called humanity. So we are coming together to create a new structure. The falling apart of the existing structure is a necessary requirement before the new structure can be built. We can't build it on the faulty foundation that Greg mentioned, and both of us have it in our books. It's a faulty foundation. You can't survive with this way we've been living. So the falling apart of society is a necessary step in the evolution. Rather than to be feared, it should be welcomed, is because if we don't do it, the inevitable end is coming, because science has already told us we're going extinct. And that's because of the way we live with each other and the way we live with the planet has been destructive of the system. So we're on the edge of a system falling apart and a new system beginning. Well, this is where you come in very critically into this, because it's a formation of a community. Out of what and from who? Where's it coming from? We've got 7 billion people. And so to give the analogy, which you've heard, but now it really makes sense if you understand it, a cell is a miniature human, as I said. It has all the functions. So I say, go inside the body of a caterpillar. And it's got, let's say, 7 billion cells in there, and they're all working together. Some of them, they have different jobs. It's really important. Some do muscle work, some do digestion work, some do blood system work. They have jobs. They all work together in a community. And as the caterpillar is growing, the environment and the economy is booming. You know, it's growing, everybody's happy, everybody's working, everything's cool. And then it reaches a plateau where the caterpillar can't grow anymore. And that is a problem, a finite problem, because all these cells that were doing jobs like moving the caterpillar around or digesting the food, well, we're not moving, we're not even taking in any food. What does it mean? The system starts falling apart. Many of the cells actually commit suicide, which in biology is called apoptosis. And there's a complete dissolution of the structure. But what's most important about that is in the midst of this dissolution, there are specialized stem cells called imaginal cells. And imaginal cells carry a vision of a different world. They're genetically identical to all the other cells, but they carry a different vision of a world. What they do is they get in among all the cells that are falling apart and help them organize into the next higher structure, which is the butterfly. So the relevance of you being in this room, number one, you are the cultural creatives that represent the imaginal cells. It's your influence in the world that can help shape the new structure of the community that must evolve. If we don't form this, then it's a choice. We may not make it. We've been here before, and we didn't make it, but this is an opportunity. If we don't change, then science's prediction of extinction is actually real and looming. And yet there is this great chance, because the internet, which represents the development of the nervous system of humanity. It connects 7 billion cells into one living organism. And we have a new population called the millennial generation. The most important part about that millennial generation is they're not part of, which represents the development of the nervous system of humanity. It connects 7 billion cells into one living organism. And we have a new population called the millennial generation. The most important part about that millennial generation is they're not part of the structure. They bitch and complain, and rightfully so, that they can't seem to get started in this world, but they don't realize not getting started is the primary step of the next evolution, for a simple reason. They don't, you tell a 20-something person that the stock market is going to crash, and they go, like I own a stock, right? I don't really care. And why that becomes important is they don't have a hold on the structure as it is. And there's now greater than 50% of them, which means less than 50% of the population is holding on to say, keep the structure the way it is, but they're getting, the population is diminishing. This is the foundation of what will cause a precipitation of the existing structure, because they're not connected to it. And they come from a global vision. They're connected by internet to a global world. The issues, if I, politically said, like Republicans in the case of, the anger things that they have and their things, they were completely taken back by the population not following them, but not recognizing the young people they don't have a thing with race or with sex and all that kind of stuff, which are those other issues. They're global. And so their vision is really where the new vision is coming from. The falling down of the old one is necessary. So this is really exciting, because it says we are on the verge of making something new. And in addition to that, there'll be one other factor besides the fact that, there's two factors for the evolution. I'll just say it very quickly, two factors. Number one, we are not victims of our health. 90-some% of ill health on this planet is now found to due totally to stress. It is not due to the biological malfunctioning. That in fact less than 5% of the population can even legitimately claim that their genetics are interfering with their life. So that means 95% of the people have a perfectly adequate genetic system, okay? We've been programmed to be victims, and the fact is, no, we are the ones that change the environment or perception of the environment. And since the environment that controls the cells, it doesn't make a difference if the cell's in a plastic dish or a skin-covered dish. It still responds to the environment. Our mind creates the chemistry, which is the foundation of the culture medium called blood, Your thoughts release different chemicals into the blood, and just as I change the culture medium in one dish to another dish, I change the fate of the cells. As you change your mind and change your perception, you change your own biology and genetics, which means you're all powerful, but you don't believe it because there's nobody supportive. This becomes really critical, and the other part is this: we've all been programmed. And this is the hardship that we face, and there's a movie called The Matrix. You may have seen people look for it in the science fiction part of the video store. It's actually a documentary. and the reason is simply this: we have been given the choice of take the blue pill and go back into the program, or take the red pill and get out of the program. They never really said what would happen if you got out of the program, and all of us have been programmed last trimester of pregnancy, first 7 years, is download. And the reason for the download is this: you cannot be conscious if you don't have data. In other words, I buy you a new iPod, you take it out of the box, I say push play, play is to create the playlist, created, conscious, let's say. I say push play on the new iPod, and nothing happens. So, well, why not? And the answer is you didn't put any programs to play from. First 7 years, nature designed the download. The download is a brain state of theta as a predominant brain state, which is hypnosis, so that children observe everyone around them and download the behavior without conscious filtering or conscious interpretation. It's just a recording. What their fathers, their mothers, their family, culture is doing is a download. And these then become the foundation of the database. Now, the issue is the conscious mind is us, our spiritual, our source, who we are. We are in the conscious mind. There's an entity in there. That's us, okay? And the conscious mind is a creative mind. The conscious mind has wishes, desires, and aspirations. The subconscious mind is the habitual mind. It just plays the programs that we got. Well, the issue is, why don't our lives match our wishes and our desires? And science is answering that simply by the fact that it recognizes that we only operate 5% of the time from our conscious minds. That means 95% of your life is coming from the subconscious programs, which means the behaviors that you represent 95% of the time are actually not even yours. Fundamentally, they were downloaded from other people. And as a result, we're not living the lives that we want to live. And we don't see it, and that's where the whole monkey wrench goes in the system. As I say in my lectures very quickly, I hope give me a minute here, I'm trying to get to the end of this. I say, go back to a time in your life, I know you had a friend, you were very close to your friend, you knew your friend's behavior very, very well, and you happen to know your friend's parent. And at one point you see your friend has some of the same behavior as their parent. So you volunteer something like, hey, Bill, you're just like your dad. And then you back away from Bill, who goes totally ballistic and says, how can you compare me to my dad? And most people are totally familiar with this. And I say, but this is a profound story. Everyone else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. The only one who doesn't see it is Bill. And there's a reason, scientifically. The conscious mind is thinking 95% of the time. And when it's thinking, by definition, it's not being mindful or paying attention. And as a result, the default shifts into the subconscious behavior. So now you're playing behavior that you don't see and comes from other people and sabotages ourselves, okay? So the programming is really where the problems come from. And the cultural programming is passed down the first 7 years unconsciously from generation to generation to generation, which presets your cancer. Children who are adopted into a family that has a lineage of cancer, the adopted child will get the same family cancer as much as any sibling would, but they came from totally different genetics. It's not the genes that did this, okay? Go back very quickly, and I'll just close it out because there's some interesting part about the story of the Matrix. It says, take the red pill and get out of the programming. And I would say, well, what would happen if you didn't go in, if you stopped operating from your programming? If you stayed mindful right now and stopped operating from the program? I'll go back very quickly, and I'll just close it out because there's some interesting part about the story of the Matrix. It says, take the red pill and get out of the programming. And I would say, well, what would happen if you didn't go in, if you stopped operating from your programming? If you stayed mindful right now and stopped operating from the program? I'll tell you what happened because you've experienced it already in your life. If you ever fell in love, head over heels in love with somebody, this was the one time in your life where you don't default to the subconscious program. It's the beginning part of love. It's called the honeymoon. 3 things are very important about it. Number 1, you're extremely healthy. And the reason is love causes brain secretions in the culture medium that give health to the cells. People glow. They have tremendous energy when they fall in love. I always joke that they make love for days without stopping for food or sleep. They got so much energy. And I also come to this most important conclusion. When you ask people who are in that state of what I call the honeymoon effect about life on this planet, to them at that moment it's heaven on earth. It's heaven on earth. And the fact was, well, that was not an accident or a coincidence. They created it from what? Conscious mind, wishes, desires, and aspirations. Then there's a tendency to lose it and falls apart. And the reason is, well, why did it fall apart? And the answer is, when life gets busy, you start to think. And the moment you start thinking, you default to the programs that you got from your parents and your community. Well, those behaviors were never part of the honeymoon. So when they're introduced, usually it's a shock to the other person to see that behavior show up. And this is where that, I love the phrase, who are you, comes out to their partner. And the fact is, then you have to go back to Bill's story. Bill didn't see he was playing the behavior, so he has no idea he has that behavior. So when a couple start to argue over the behavior that shows up and one doesn't even know they played the behavior, that's where the thing starts falling apart and compromises start coming in. Well, I accept that crummy behavior because we had this great honeymoon part. That was really good. But then another compromise and another compromise. And every time you compromise, the honeymoon disappears, quick, piece by piece by piece, until you say, no more compromises, relationship over. And then you stand there thinking, how did something so wonderful turn into this? And the answer was, it was wonderful when you operated from your creative, conscious mind and were mindful. And you lost it when the programs kicked in. So the world we're facing today is, in a conclusion, cosmic joke, if I would really look at it the way I love to see it, is that we've been programmed to believe that we die and then we go to heaven. My perception is a little different. I think we're born into heaven. And this is where we come to create. This is where we come to have experiences. When we die, we carry those with us, but not the opportunity to make more creations, because this is a virtual reality suit that, as I was saying earlier, when I wasn't spiritual. I had nothing to do with spirituality. I was doing genetics and molecules, all these things. And then I saw the nature of the spirituality, and it was a moment of my whole life changed. And the moment was when I asked myself, when I owned all of a sudden that I have a spiritual part to me and a physical part, and I asked myself, why have both? And the cells answered the question. With a question, I asked, why have both a spirit and a body? And the cells said this to me, Bruce, if you're just a spirit, what does chocolate taste like? And all of a sudden I realized that's a short way of saying all the experiences, the emotions, what you see with your eyes, what you hear with your ears, what you taste with what you feel and touch and smell, all of that is derived from this cellular machine that converts the sensations of our world into vibration, and the brain sends the vibration back to source. And I realized, biggest mistake in my whole life, because as males, what was the programming? Males were programmed not to be sensitive. Because if we were sensitive, then we were sissies. So we got to the point of how insensitive we can be. Well, hit me and see if I cry. That was the test. I'm so insensitive, you can hit me. And then, of course, we grew up in a world with all these women with all their sensitivity, because that's allowed. And they look at us going, how come they're so damn insensitive? And it's the programming. And the fact is, I wasted a lot of my life realizing that our business on this planet is experiential, and to go and be creative, and to manifest experiences you want to carry with you. And the group of the Synergy Foundation, you people all here, are creating experiences in this world, and you're at a level of your experiential creations are capable of influencing a large number of other people, because that's how it's going to spread. As people let go of the programming and move into personal creativity, we all create heaven on earth when we're in love. If we got rid of the program, by then definition, everyone would be manifesting their version of heaven on earth. And I think this is the destination that we're moving into, but the old structure is in a state of collapse with new thinking. And this is what Greg and I emphasize about the new science, the new thinking that shapes the way we live. So we are definitely on the verge of the greatest possible step of human evolution ever, the coming together of a unity called humanity. And the synergy of 7 billion people coming together in the world of science leads to something called emergence. And emergence is things we couldn't even imagine right at this minute. When that many people come together, will pop out of our world. So there's a world that's so far beyond even our imagination at this moment, just looming on the horizon. And as Greg said, all the answers that we need are here, and when this comes together, it will completely turn this planet into heaven on earth, which it rightfully is. And we have to understand this, that we've had a belief about whatever are coming together to create a new structure. The falling apart of the existing structure is a